Reading from The Use of Signaling Cannot Identify Valuable Intrinsically Motivated Outliers by Ingram Fry. Supervision is an effective motivator, yet simultaneously it is a costly prospect. The ability to identify those with intrinsic motivation towards an objective that will perform regardless of supervision would be a valuable tool. Steele et al. 2017 gives us a surprising insight into the effect of supervision. The study simultaneously found great benefits and no benefits from resistance training in the elderly, depending on whether the resistance training was supervised. An initial supervised 6-month intervention led to impressive gains. For example, the post-intervention median leg press, 1RM, was 2.63 times that of pre-intervention. However, after the supervised intervention, the median in all parameters reversed. Some participants voluntarily continued with resistance training, and others did not. At a 6-month post-intervention follow-up, no statistical difference could be detected between the participants who continued with resistance training and those who did not. It might then be determined that unsupervised resistance training is useless. There was, however, the occasional outlier who was able to increase their strength unsupervised in the 6 months without supervision. These exceptional individuals did not affect a statistical difference between the resistance training and non-resistance training group, but they did manage to get gains after the intervention, a result which after 6 months could not have happened by mere chance. This data confirms that individuals exist that work effectively without supervision, but nothing within the data predicts who those individuals are. The strength gains of those few who continued to gain strength after the intervention were entirely unremarkable, neither exceptionally high nor exceptionally low. Meanwhile, the individual with the most marked increase in strength under supervision had the largest drop in strength without supervision. If the supervised gains represent effort put into signaling commitment and are analogous to credentials, how could an observer determine which candidate is the most valuable? If this were a hiring pool for a job that required unsupervised effort, the person with the best credentials would cash in and then achieve nothing unsupervised and be a bad hire, whereas the best candidates are obscured by the noise. This data parallels the red flag paradox that suggests that those who rely most heavily on signals of credibility might in fact be lacking inherent credibility. It could be that humans instinctively act different when under observation. Signal theory may explain this instinct. Tan and Jayasekara. What signal theory doesn't answer is how participants will act when not observed by fellow participants or an authority figure. Acts of dedication towards the intrinsic value of the task and acts meant to signal dedication towards the group may be indistinguishable. It is proposed that conformity and the sharing of values is valued so highly in situ under observation as to render effort meant to be observed as a signal and effort towards a goal of inherent value indistinguishable from one another. The proposed formula for expected value is thus: expected value to participant equals effort divided by signal value plus inherent value. Signal value equals effort times recognition, and inherent value equals value of payoff divided by chance of success. Under the 6-month observation period, all effort was recognized, therefore no signal value was ever wasted. After the 6-month period of non-observation, all participants had major strength gains. They therefore ought to have been convinced that resistance training leads to strength gains. Apparently, only a minority valued the strength gains enough to put in the effort necessary to achieve them without supervision. Signal theory was originally put forth as a mathematical proof of concept, a heuristic of sorts that employers could use to eliminate risk when employing workers. These results draw into question the effectiveness of signaling to identify the most valuable workers. Presuming employers don't want to put a large amount of their own attention into monitoring their workers, or employ extra employees to supervise other employees, they would do well to identify those who will work effectively on a task without external prompting. The fact that signaling is so instinctively ingrained into the human psyche would seem to confound this process. There are perhaps subjective ways in which the internal motives of individuals can be determined. In Fisher et al. 2023, it was noted that individuals who train in pairs had an 80% chance of being injured during training. As far as we know, the remaining 20% of uninjured respondents have subsequently injured themselves. James Steele was said to have responded that training with a partner is pure ego. The motives of an exercising individual may be focused on the long-term payoff, inherent value, or the status derived from recognition, signal value. The exerciser's training with a training partner may attempt dangerous feats of strength to garner immediate recognition, prioritizing this over their own long-term health and safety. The gauge of inherent value of a resistance training exercise may rely on internally measured biofeedback, proximity to failure, and on isolating and stretching the muscle. The signal value of an exercise may rely on quantifiability and appearances, such as on range of motion and weight. Even if no witnesses are present, a signaler can truthfully say, "I did X squats at Y weight," whereas a person exercising for inherent value is unlikely to say, "I effectively isolated my deltoid and experienced failure." Thus, effective resistance training may nonetheless look unimpressive when observed. An impressive-looking exercise may be good at providing extrinsic motivation, but is otherwise a poor value proposition. Where these conflicts exist, an exercise's motivations may be unintentionally telegraphed, but with the ever-changing nature of culture, these signals and interpretation of these signals will always be in flux. It is likely that in many endeavors, a knowledgeable observer can distinguish between those who are dedicating their effort towards solving the problem at hand and those who will put in effort merely to be seen to be putting in effort. It is unlikely that witting subjects can distinguish themselves using objective empirical measures without simultaneously making intrinsically motivated individuals indistinguishable from the rest of the group. Much research has been dedicated to creating cohesive cooperative groups. Tan and Jayasekara, 2024. The use of economic games relies on constant interaction and feedback between participants. This doesn't tell us how participants will behave when unobserved. Recently, a Wells Fargo employee died at her desk on Friday and wasn't found until late Tuesday. Employees were tipped off by the smell. This shows that unlike lab conditions, it is possible for a worker to be literally dead for days without anyone noticing. So how people act when unobserved becomes relevant. Outside the lab, most groups or workplaces are ostensibly formed around a purpose. The propensity for an individual to cooperate for the sake of establishing themselves within a group doesn't necessarily predict an individual's willingness to sacrifice on behalf of the supposed purpose of that group, when no acknowledgement or supervision is present. Tan and Jayasekara shows that ritualistic conformity promotes group cooperation and the expression of shared values and identity when interacting. But Dali and Batson, 1973, showed that expressing group values does not predict acting on those values when under the impression that nobody is observing. Just like Steele, Bali and Batson found a small group of outliers who did act without explicit supervision. Participants in Dali and Batson were given questionnaires to determine whether they were intrinsically or extrinsically motivated. The outliers who did act on their values when unsupervised were all intrinsically motivated. Fry, 2024, suggests that the group dynamics that promote pro-social behavior and mutual beneficence within a group may lead to apathy concerning the group they are purported to serve. Cooperative dynamics exploited to form a functional group to serve the community may instead lead to the formation of a group whose function is to serve only themselves. Functionally, such groups can exist only to virtue signal without accomplishing anything. It is concerning that a proposed mechanism by which employers consider candidates and groups determine trustworthiness has no predictive power over their intrinsic motivation. Thus, commitment to a group and commitment to the purported values and purpose of that group are two entirely separate metrics, and those who are intrinsically motivated towards the values and purpose of the group are likely statistical outliers.